Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. My name is Joe Thomas, I'm the Echo's Everton FC correspondent, and alongside me today we have got Goodison Park ever presence, fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at things at the moment, Paul Wheelock and Gav Buckland, and we've also got the Echo's Business of Football correspondent, Dave Powell, who'll be here to take us through a few more bits and pieces on the 777 proposed takeover of Everton, which obviously announced on Friday, and we covered it in that podcast, but there's a little bit more flesh on the bone coming through, and Dave will take us through that. But there's only one place to start. That is, of course, Goodison Park, the Super Sunday billing. Felt like it had every reason to be the Super Sunday billing going into yesterday's game. I think 4:30 on the Sunday afternoon. You had so many potential storylines around Everton, the takeover, Arsenal and their fight for the title. You know, the history between the sides. Everton somehow managing to conspire to continuously beat Arsenal in this game, however their play's been off the pitch. So even though it was only moved to that schedule, a fortnight ago, quite shamefully by the TV companies, I thought I had every right to be there. Unfortunately, it didn't provide the entertainment that I think that the broadcasters would have hoped for, Paul.
No, it's one to forget, wasn't it, really? I think if you're going to set up the way that we did, the only way you can come out there with a modicum of happiness is if you end up with probably the 0-0 draw that I think it's fair to assume that Sean Dyche was playing for. The fact that we lost 1-0, it was just made it all the worse, really, because don't get me wrong, the gap between Arsenal and Everton is huge. Even though Arsenal didn't play particularly well yesterday, the gap is huge, and there's no shame in losing 1-0 to them at home. But I think the most disappointing aspect was the fact that I think a lot of us left the ground thinking that we didn't really have a go. Certainly compared to the games we've had against Arsenal in recent years, and most recently, obviously, in Sean Dyche's his first game in charge, it was. As I say, it's not the end of the world to lose at home to Arsenal. The results against Fulham and Wolves could well be far more damaging. But yeah, I didn't feel like I got my money's worth yesterday.
Gav, what did you make of things? I think it's fair to say going into the game that, for all the hope and the expectation, and obviously nobody should come to Goodison Park and expect to win. I think most Everton fans would have accepted that Everton were underdogs going into yesterday, and that's how it played out onto the pitch. I mean, bear in mind that context, how disappointed or frustrated were you actually with what happened within that only 94 minutes yesterday?
It's one of the most disappointing performances I've seen from Everton at home for many a long time.
Really?
Notwithstanding who we were playing,
I mean, it's a big claim when you go back to Brighton last season, Newcastle last season, and some of those really disappointing games.
I could at least in those games you could see game plans and effort, and but they just did badly. But on yesterday, after 30 minutes, like a lot of people, I was just sitting there and thinking, what's our game plan here? We've got like a 4-1-4-1. We're just watching Arsenal pass the ball in front of us across the pitch and trying to get it behind us. And it was quite clear we didn't have one, because as soon as we got the ball, within about 10 seconds, we'd lost it again. And that was why I would say it's one of the worst performances, because we should have been doing better. And I get this Dyche fitness, and we've spoken about at the start of the season. Joe, remember in one of the pods saying, if you haven't got, obviously got a small squad, is, work hard, try and bridge some gaps by being also competitive. And, we have, as to say, the Dyche fitness and all this, and whatever he says about maximum effort is the minimum requirement or whatever it is. And I saw none of that yesterday, apart from the defence, I think. And that was the disappointment. We were just allowed Arsenal to do anything they wanted and didn't have a plan in possession. And that was the thing, wasn't it? How many you would expect on an 90-minute game to have at least some coherent play in their final third, even just by the law of averages dictates that, and we didn't have that at all, and that's reflected in the number of touches that players had on our team, and so that's why I'm saying it's one of those disappointing performances over the last few years at Goodison.
Gav, I'll stick with you. Do you think that there was no game plan, or do you think that there was a game plan that was just on the day very poorly executed? And I think I'm asking you there is essentially, are you putting this on the players or are you putting this on Dyche?
I'll put on Dyche, to be honest with you, because we're quite clear about when we had a game plan to contain Arsenal, didn't we? Which is fine. 4-1-4-1, and we played 2 narrow banks of forward. He's obviously afraid of that space between, what we've been vulnerable for all season between the midfield and the back four, which opposition players have filled. And, see their plays Odegaard and people like that who really, really hated in those areas. So he played 2 very low banks of 4. So I've not got a problem with that. The problem I've got is what we made no effort to win the ball back. And once we had the ball, what was our plan when we had it? And what was our plan to get up the pitch? And I saw none of that. The game plan just appeared to be put 9 men behind the ball, albeit we made that reasonably effective, and just play for a 0-0. And that was it. And that was really disappointing for me. And I think the players, when we did have possession, some of our passing was just woeful, which we'll probably talk about. And so, Dyche for me, the way they set up, I think at times when we had the ball, the players as well for their the lack of accuracy in the passing, but we just didn't appear to have a game plan other than containment. And you're not going to get anything from football games if that's your plan. So I think 80% of it's on Dyche on me, to be fair.
See, I'm a bit torn on this because I can understand why people are. I can certainly understand why people are frustrated having watched it. It was a dire game, and it was a bad performance. There's no getting away around that. Everton on the ball were atrocious. Their ball retention was terrible. They were sloppy. They were poor in their decision making. But I can kind of understand what Dyche was trying to do, and you obviously sit deep, have a compact, two bags of the defensive lines, keep it, draw Arsenal onto them, and obviously try and win the ball, and then set Danjuma free, set McNeil free, set Beto free. Obviously, on the occasions when they did win the ball, they weren't able to do that. As we've said, that the pass and the distribution was really, really bad, of course. But I did think for the first half, I thought it was a competent defensive display. I thought that Arsenal didn't really create a chance. Obviously, they had the goal that was disallowed. If you accept that was offside, they didn't really create a chance. I thought that Everton had an opportunity just after the goal. Obviously, Gabriel Martinelli coming off, I thought was a big boost to Everton because he's not quite as intense and aggressive in his forward movement. Trossard isn't quite as aggressive and intense in his forward movement as someone like Gabriel Martinelli. So what it did was it gave Dyche then the opportunity to switch his wingers a little bit and gave Everton a chance to get out, which they didn't do. But Everton were applauded off at half-time. I didn't go into half-time thinking it was panic stations. And I think, bearing in mind this was against Arsenal, I don't think that was the worst first half they could have been, albeit uninspiring. Obviously, second half, Arsenal started brightly. I think we understand the goal was coming, and I think we can also all accept that once that goal came, Everton went, they could have. Dyche talks about only being 4 minutes of added on time. There could have been 40. Everton weren't going to score yesterday.
Yeah.
And that is obviously a problem. But Arsenal are also very, very good defensively. They have one of the best defenses in the league so far this season. So there is some degree to which I'm willing to, mitigating circumstance, I'm willing to consider.
Yeah, of course.
I obviously spoke to him after the game, and I thought he actually spoke quite well. And this has come from someone that doesn't always think he does after the games. Some people listening to this or watching this might have seen the interaction I had with him after Sheffield United, which I thought he handled poorly in the aftermath of that game. But there are times after bad performances where he comes out and he's quite combative or he's quite defensive. And I thought he was quite open yesterday, and the way in which he was talking, owned up to the lack of quality in the transition, the sloppiness within the possession, and also pointed to the poor decision making that was made on the pitch. And I had a little bit of sympathy with him that actually I thought, having listened to him, there might have been a game plan, like I said a minute ago, like I asked you, Gav, had been poorly executed rather than having been no plan whatsoever. I mean, Paul, you understand the game certainly a lot better than I do. I mean, what was your takeaway on that? Where do you lay the blame for, and how bad do you think it was?
I thought, yes, it's tricky, isn't it? I for years now with Everton's midfield, you tear your hair out at the lack of basic passing at times, and I thought yesterday there were moments. I mean, Sean Dyche did mention in the press conference, obviously, which you were talking about there. We did have good moments for transition, and that was clearly the game plan, wasn't it, to contain and then to spring on the counter attack. And there were moments where Onana, particularly, Idrissa Gueye, I can remember a few of occasions, him, Decore, and the passing just wasn't good enough. And I thought yesterday was kind of maybe a bit of an eye opener of how much we're going to miss Alex Iwobi, because for all his faults, he is the kind of player who can take a pass and can pick a pass. And the times he gave the ball away, he was always being brave with it. So I do think Sean Dyche was let down by moments of quality, really, in his midfield particularly. But equally, as Gav said earlier, if you set up like that, you're always at a risk as if Arsenal score. And I was kind of like strangely impressed by Arsenal yesterday. They didn't make it an emotional game, did they? I've seen City do this at Goodison a number of years. It's almost boring, but Arsenal haven't won here for 6 years, so they took the emotion out of the game, and it was just really, really dull. And I just don't think the crowd got going. I don't think the players got going. But certainly after you go one down, the game plan at that stage has to change. You know, as I said in the first comments on today's pod, you can walk away and accept a boring 0-0 draw against a team of Arsenal's quality, but it's what happens after you go one down. And Sean Dyche, you know, he's labelled as a long ball manager in some quarters. And strangely, since he's come to Everton, I've actually been more impressed by the way he's got Everton attacking and the setup play. And I think for a long period, if, say, Neil Maupay, without putting it on him, would have taken some of his chances, and if we would have had a fit and available striker for a lot of his tenure, I think we would have scored a lot more goals. And I know he referred to XG again after the game last night. But on the flip side, I've not always been impressed that much defensively, which was a surprise given that a lot of people thought that's what he would bring to Everton. Yesterday, I thought it was the flip. It was the flip side. I thought I would have expected more performances like that from Sean Dyche during his time at Everton. But the good things that he brought to us just wasn't there yesterday. You know, I think the players weren't good, but I have to agree with Gav. It's largely on Dyche for me yesterday. I just didn't. As good as Arsenal we are Everton. We have got a good record against Arsenal at home over Chelsea. We give Liverpool a game at home. I don't think it's a given. Maybe apart from City these days, who come together, Goodison as one of the big six teams and expect to walk all over us. And I thought Arsenal left yesterday having not really been tested, to be honest.
Gav, we know that there's a gulf in quality between the two squads. That isn't under any dispute. You know, we've spoken about tactics and approach to the game there. Were you more disappointed by the setup and the lack of ambition, or were you more disappointed by, again, something I think we can agree on was probably a bit of a lack of fight from the Everton players? Because we saw this very much in the game, in the same fixture in February when Everton did win this match. If you're a team that's perhaps lacking in the ability of the opposition, one thing that you can do to try and level the playing field a little bit is essentially try and drag them down to your level a bit, turn it into a bit of a scrap, get at them. Watch Match of the Day 2 earlier, they did a big segment on basically how many passes Arsenal were able to put together from the kickoff without Everton even getting near, not only to the ball, but to even laying a finger on any of the Arsenal players, just to let them know that they were there and they were in a game. I mean, that was disappointing yesterday, wasn't it, in that element? Yeah,
and I say, I mean, I think, when you're saying about poor performances and stuff, and you've seen worse, and I think what I'd say there is, the way that, and I suppose best to sum that up by saying we didn't give ourselves an opportunity to play badly, because the easiest thing in football, I know some would disagree, is to set up a defence, isn't it? You know, you can do that. You can contain if you put numbers there, and Dyche has explained how to do that. We didn't give ourselves an opportunity to play badly because we didn't take any risks at any point really during the course of the game. And that's it for me. I think in terms of the two things you mentioned there, I think the setup of the team was wrong. I could start, my normal bashing the drum about not having a midfield balance. I felt that Garner should have played yesterday, James Garner, that is, the way we set up, probably instead of me, probably Decore. I think that was set up. I didn't think the substitutions were great, by the way. I'll cover that off later. So that set up, it was just... it was the wrong players. And Garner's a player, James Garner's a player who can pass the ball and can put his foot on it. And that might have given us a little bit of an opportunity just to break Arsenal's momentum. And I think, you are right, isn't it? The second bit I think was equally frustrating. That I don't think they showed the montage on Match of the Day 2 last night. They showed the opening minutes of the game in February and the game yesterday. And I know the manager's first game is not necessarily the best comparison, but it was just watching two completely different games, wasn't it? When they kicked off at Arsenal in February, we were all over them, and yesterday we kicked off, we were like 9 men at the edge of our penalty area, and and I think I detected that, and especially when we had played as I say 4-1-4-1, we had Garner, Gay and Decore reasonably advanced, and they should have been getting into the opposition defence, and they were just standing off, weren't they? And the second half, the second half was even worse for me. I always got told when you watch football, don't watch the ball, watch what's 30 yards ahead of the ball. That's where all the interest and stuff goes on. But yesterday, you didn't have to do that because all of the play was contained within about a 20-yard wide margin at the edge of our penalty area, wasn't it? In the second half. So you could see exactly what was happening whilst watching the ball. And the fact, with one or two exceptions, it was the lack of pressing and that desire and bite in the centre of the park that was really frustrating for me as well, apart from the setup.
Paul, I think obviously Gav there suggested that he'd have started Garner. I mean, there were some interesting decisions that Sean Dyche had to make going into this match. Some of them would have come as a surprise. Obviously, he chose Beto over Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think that was probably a 50-50. But then bringing in Vitaly Mykolenko and moving Ashley Young to right back instead of Patterson. I mean, what did you think of that?
I wasn't surprised, to be honest. I think Patterson had a really good second half against Sheffield United. Thought he was really good going forward. I think he's had a pretty tough start to the season. He's not alone. And if we were going to play so defensively like we did yesterday, probably Mykolenko, I'm safe to assume that I think he's a better defender than Patterson. I thought Mykolenko gave the ball away a couple of times, but outside of Branthwaite, for me, he was probably our best player yesterday. He was up against a world-class player in Bukayo Saka, and I thought he did pretty well, Mykolenko. I think he could be happy with his day's work. So I think he was justified in that selection. I thought Young was okay. Set pieces aside, which is an ongoing issue with Ashley Young, corners and free kicks at the moment. But I think defensively he was pretty good as well. Going forward, I know Gav, you've been saying on this podcast for a number of years about the midfield balance, and it's going to be coming to even more question now that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's fit, because can you afford to go 4-4-2 and then who's your best two there? I don't think he knows his best three yet, to be honest. And I think it might have been slightly, Dyche is not very emotional, is he? But I thought his admissions around the Iwobi were quite interesting. I know he may not have always played him in probably what Alex Iwobi thought was his strongest positions, but he was a go-to player for him, wasn't he? And I wonder if he's got a real issue there. I think Sean Dyche now. I think not only whether he's going to play two up front, and then whether we've got two midfielders who can do a job to hold the midfield together while we do that. But looking at that yesterday, I just thought we were desperately lacking in quality and creativity, really. It may change a little bit when Harrison comes back, because we'll have a more natural player who plays on the right. But I kind of agreed with the starting lineup. I could see where he was going with it, but if we're going to need some more ball plays in midfield, which we desperately look like we do now, you do wonder whether Garner should play more.
Yeah, I think. I think it said it at the time, wrote it at the time. I think Iwobi's an absolutely huge loss for having, regardless as to whether or not Deitch was going to play him in the middle, left of the midfield three, which is probably his best position, or out wide. I think we really missed it yesterday, having that opportunity to have somebody that could pick up the ball on the edge of his area and either carry it 20 yards forward, or was probably our most effective player at picking that 20-yard wall to find Beto in a channel, slip him in behind a fullback, help get Everton up the pitch. And I think Everton are going to miss that a lot this season. I've got to be honest, I don't think Sean Dyche plans to play a lot through the middle. So for all the calls for ball players in the middle, I'm not sure how much we're going to see of that this season, whether people like it or not. I think it's going to be hit the channels for Dan Juma and McNeil, or hit the head of Beto. Or Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Paul, you kind of alluded to it there with the set pieces, because I think that's another big issue. Probably a compromise here between both you and Gav. Feels like I feel like I'm onto a winner with both of you. It feels like the argument to include Garner wherever it is on the pitch, James Garner that is, there are a couple of layers supporting that, I think, at the moment. One, the option just to freshen up that midfield three and let them know that they're not all guaranteed starters might help. But, on the flip side, you could play him at right back and that as well, I think. And just to have somebody there with the better distribution on the pitch, because the set pieces have been woeful this season, haven't they, Gavin? For a side that, creates so little, and for a side that should be quite good in the air, when you look like Tarkowski and, whether it's DCL or Beto and Decore and some of the other players, I mean, that's something that the Dyche has got to sort out pretty quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what happens is not only do you don't become a threat, you also give the opportunity to break quickly, don't you? When the goalie, I mean, how many catches the goalie made this season from our set pieces? Loads. And you'd have McNeil on. McNeil was a player. I don't know what you thought, Joe. I thought he didn't look fit yesterday.
No.
To me, I don't know what they said, but after the game, but he was a player who quite clearly had very little, certainly match fitness. He was just way off the pace, and but he should have been on set pieces, and it was our only chance yesterday. I think we got one corner, but as ever, any crosses, anything from a corner went straight to their keeper, and then he give them a chance to possibly break, which is you might want to talk about their goal, but that's where I was sitting in the press box yesterday. As soon as this happened, they said, this is going to cost us. Their goal. What's about a minute before their goal? Pickford gets the ball, and rather than cooling things down and letting everybody get off the pitch and just generally taking the sting out of the game, he whacks the ball as quickly, like the Wolves goalie on Saturday, whacks the ball as far off the pitch as possible, over the heads of our players who are on the forward. Arsenal pick it up, get the ball back at the edge of our box, get the corner, then he score. And I thought that was really poor play from Pickford, poor choice, because it was completely at odds with what we were trying to achieve during the game. And ultimately, it started the chain of events exactly later where they score. And I thought that wasn't great from somebody who should have really,
How much do you think, obviously, because for all that being said, there was one big change that happened just before Pickford does that clearance. That's obviously Dominic Calvert-Lewin had come on. So do you think it was still a bad decision, or do you think that the fact that he had Dominic Calvert-Lewin to aim for, judging by those, with him and Beto, looks probably. We know what Dominic Calvert-Lewin can do in the air, and he probably looks more aggressive in the air than Beto did. Do you think it was an attempt to try and exploit the potential newfound advantage from that?
The ball went the halfway line, didn't it? And ultimately went over his head. Do that when everybody's in position, because as soon as they won the ball back, we were out of shape then completely. And I just thought it was at odds with our carefully cultivated plan to get a point. He wasn't lucky. He was a bit unlucky with the substitution, wasn't he? Because he brought Calvert-Lewin just before they scored, and I'm sure if it was 0-0, if there was 1-0 and Beto being on the pitch, he may have wanted both of them on the pitch. But I didn't understand that substitution either, Joe, because you've got a number 9 who's completely isolated, not doing anything, and you place him by number 9, who's going to be isolated, not going to do anything. And that was a bit of a waste. And I thought the Decore Garner one I didn't understand that either, as much as wanted Garner on the pitch. I would have moved Decore further up the pitch at that point and brought Garner on for, say, Garner Gay or something. I didn't get that at all. And they were two strange substitutions for me. Which, when you talk about who was to blame yesterday, debate all the players. I put some of that substitution stuff on Dice, though, notwithstanding the fact he was a little bit unlucky that he changed. He might have wanted both better on Calvert-Lewin, if he was chasing the game. He took him off just before they scored. But it was I watched it again this morning by Pickford. It was just why are you doing that? You don't need to do it. It was a bit like the Wolves goalie on Saturday.
Paul, for all the kind of the concerns that are being raised over yesterday's performance, how much are you willing to concede that it might have just been a difficult day against a very, very good side? I mean, are the concerns you have about yesterday's performance concerns you're going to carry in and you think could cost Everton against Luton and Bournemouth? Obviously, Brentford coming up before then away from home. Or do you actually, think that against weaker opposition, Everton might be able to have more success with the same game plan, which, obviously Fulham and Wolves both ended up in the same, result that Arsenal did, but Everton had a lot more joy going forward in those games. The issue was finishing chances rather than creativity.
Well, I thought the supporters were incredibly patient yesterday. I think if we set up like that against Luton and Bournemouth, I don't think that patience will last anywhere near as long. So it was just drab. It was grim. It was dreary. So we're only a day out from it. So yeah, the disappointment is still large at the moment. Again, the days to come across the course of the season. I hate to say it because it sounds so defeatist, but it's just where we are as a team and a club at the moment. 1-0 home defeat to Arsenal is really not going to change our destiny. It's those two games that we've got coming up, and sadly it's the two games that we've had already this season, and that's what makes it worse. We've had 3 games at home now, not scored one, not got a single point. If we would have won those 2 games earlier in the season, yesterday doesn't matter as much. I certainly hope we don't play like that in those 2 games to come, and we shouldn't, because Deitch is coming in for a fair bit of stick from the supporters and on this podcast today, and I think it's deserved. But he set us certainly against Fulham. We played really well, and I think we had more than enough chances against Wolves, and that was without probably a recognised centre forward, or certainly a recognised Everton centre forward, which I don't think Mopai ever was. So all it's done is yesterday is just piled more pressure onto those 2 home games coming up, really, because let's face it, Brentford that's a really tough away game next week. I thought they were the better team against Newcastle for long periods on Saturday, and it's just the longer we go without this win, the higher the pressure goes, really. So there's no reason why we should play like we did yesterday against Luton in 2 weeks' time, not at all. If you're doing this podcast, we're doing this podcast, and it's the same performance again, well, question marks are really going to be, questions are really going to start to be asked. So no, I'm, in the days to come, I will get over yesterday, but the start's not been good enough, has it, at all? No.
I think what I was more getting at with Luton and Bournemouth is, I still think that to some degree that was a very poor performance from the midfield 3, partly because they were forced so deep by a better side. And I think that if you put the same 11 out, probably with against Luton or Bournemouth, I think they're 10 yards further up the pitch just because the opposition aren't as good. And from there, perhaps can act as a better springboard going forward. Gav, I led my match report on this yesterday. 3 defeats at Goodison Park. I think that's 6 losses in 7 at home.
Yeah,
that really isn't good. I think Luton is a must-win. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Bournemouth is a game which is looking very, very big, isn't it? Because I think Everton can beat Luton and not learn anything, and we could not learn anything about where Everton are at the moment this season. I think Bournemouth is probably going to be at a point when this squad is at its peak fitness-wise. I think
Wow.
Calvert-Lewin will have been back for a while. Beto will have integrated properly. Dan Juma will have integrated properly. McNeil should be match fit. Harrison will probably be back around then as well. Yeah, that feels like a big barometer as to where the next stage of Everton season is going to lie. Is because I think that mid-table to bottom half of the table type of side, basically the type of game against a side that is going to be competent, but Everton have to really be beaten at home if they're going to have a chance of avoiding a really bleak relegation battle this season. Dyche is probably going to have everything that he's going to have available in that squad for certainly until January, probably for most of this season, for that game. It's getting bigger and bigger, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it so? The Luton game's first, isn't it? I think Luton and Bournemouth.
Like I said, I'm skipping out Brentford and Luton because I'm thinking if we're trying to be fair to Dyche and try not to put too much pressure on the situation. Obviously, you can't give games away, but I think Brentford's a very difficult game on Saturday. And then on the flip side, trying to not give too much credit to Dyche or anyone if it comes off. I think Luton, they just have to win. But we don't learn much about this Everton side because everyone's should be going to beat Luton.
No, I get that. I think what you're saying in a roundabout way, possibly, what we're saying here is that we possibly expect Luton to, dare I say, go straight back down, and there's a group of probably 4 or 5 clubs that have got a possibility of being relegated, and that we're in that group, and probably Bournemouth are in that group. And
we're definitely in. I think Bournemouth, I'm unsure about them. Obviously, they made some good signings.
They have done, but you still, I'm still, I'm not saying that I wouldn't. I'm probably showing, I don't want to give Bournemouth a stick here, but I wouldn't necessarily see them mid-table. But I think they're possibly in that group anyway with us, that little mini table, and I think if you win your games against that group, I think that will be, that's going to be beneficial to you. But the Luton game's a must win. You know what? If you offer me 4 points in those 2 games, now I'd take it.
Yeah. If they lost,
because you've got the derby, then have me. The derby is the 21st of October. But you give me 4 points in 2 games, I'd take it. No.
What do you think needs to? How bad do you think he's to get before Dyche gets under pressure, or do you think he's under pressure now?
If you want me to answer that question, I think he's under pressure now. I think that's possibly a little bit unfair considering the amount of, or the lack of resource available to him during the summer. But some of it comes down to what we've just been speaking about here. I think what you'd say is about is if we Fulham and Wolves, if we play like that at home in those 2 games, I think we'll get points. I think our luck's got to change a little bit in goal against some of the less stronger teams, and I think we'll have a better complement of players. But he's under pressure, and I think if he said to him, take 5 points in the next 3 games, because I can see he gets something at Brentford. And draw at Brentford's not beyond the realms of possibility. Not Man City already. He needs that because he won two of his first 3 games, is it? And is it 3 and 20 he's won? Premier League matches, which is, and 3 and 20, that's, if you've only done that, then you're going to be under pressure. And I think he is at the moment. And, it's a big month or 2 for him, isn't it, really?
I mean, Paul, what do you think? I mean, with instability, so much instability off the pitch, and I think, let's be honest, instability on the pitch when you look at the state of that transfer window. I mean, personally, I think that a lot's going to go wrong before Dyche is really under pressure, just because I think I don't know where they go beyond that, and I think he needs a bit of time, especially having had some influence in this transfer window as well to build the side together. I don't think he can be complacent about where he is at the minute, but I think there's still some way to go before he'd be under any real pressure, I think. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, we need another managerial change, like a hole in the head, particularly what's going on off the field at the moment. He kept us up last season, and he deserves credit for that because he did it with the only manager and the only squad in the whole of the Premier League not to have it reinforced in January, and actually to make it weakened by the sale of Anthony Gordon. He did what was needed. And this season, if you try and be unemotional about it, yesterday was really disappointing. Just the nature of the performance. I think if we would have lost 3-1 and had a go, I think people wouldn't be as disappointed as they are today. Villa was a disgrace. There's no getting away from that. That performance was shocking, as was the whole performance again, as the first half performance at Doncaster, but he got the required response in the second half. Other than that, I think Sheffield United was an okay performance. You probably take a point away from there. And the 2 home defeats against Wolves and Fulham, I wouldn't particularly put on him. The players have got to finish the chances in that game. So for myself, I'm not looking for him to be going anywhere, certainly at this juncture. But Brentford away, Villa away in the cup, they are 2 hard games because Villa's squad now they've got strength and depth. I think they're even with 4, 5, 6 changes, it will be a very difficult night there. I think he will be under huge pressure if we go into those Luton and Bournemouth games having lost to Villa. I think I agree with Gav. If we could take 5 points from these next 3 games, snap your hand off right now. But I think if we go into those 2 home games out of the cup and having lost to Brentford, I think he'll need 2 wins really. Probably go into a wider discussion about the club off the field now. But even if he is bang under pressure going into those games, this is all very speculative now. I don't even know if we can be in a position to change managers, with everything that's going on.
Well, you're in danger of stealing my transition here. I largely agree. I think that for the disappointment of only having 1 point from the first 5 games of this season, I think I tend to have some sympathy for Dyche when you look at the underlying performances, Villa aside. Obviously Wolves and Fulham, I think had he had the squad that was available to him now, I think that both of those would probably, if he'd have had either Calvert-Lewin or Beto up front, I think they probably would have at least taken 4 points from those games, maybe more. And even yesterday, I get the disappointment, I get the frustration, but I still am perhaps a little bit more willing to concede it as more of a bad day at the office against a very good side than necessarily something to kind of incite too much panic in me, albeit I do think there are a couple of warning signs that have to be dealt with pretty quickly. And I think the state of that 3-man midfield that kept Everton up to a large degree last season, I think shaking it up might be a little bit useful in the coming games, even if it's just to add a little bit of a reminder that there's some competition there, even with Iwobi's departure. Dave, this obviously works as a good opportunity to bring you in. We'll move on to 777 in a minute, but I'll just ask you for your thoughts on this first. Bear in mind we're on this topic. I mean, if Everton were to have any concerns around Dyche, and as I say, just to make my thoughts clear, I think they'd be wrong to do so at the moment. And like Paul says, I think any managerial change like a hole in the head. Do you think they could actually afford it?
It's a difficult one because ultimately, who factors in who's paying the compensation in that respect? It'd have to be almost a conversation between 2 parties. While there's an agreement in principle between Moshiri and 777 right now, it's Everton aren't under new ownership. It's still the football club owned by Farhad Moshiri, but you do imagine that there would have to be a conversation that takes place there in terms of what does the severance package look like? Is this the right person to take us forward, etc.? And it might be a decision which the new owners or prospective new owners may not agree with. My hunch would be they would probably, want anything like that in terms of a decision-making process moving forward to be under their control. But where are we now? We are in, we're heading into October. This, seeking regulatory approval for this deal, if it goes ahead at all, could take up to 12 weeks, maybe longer. And it's a very strange time. I'm trying to rack my brain and think back to a time when another football club was thinking about changing manager in between a takeover, and it's quite difficult because that happens. That break happens sometimes when takeovers happen. It happened at Liverpool back in 2010, etc. But when the stakes are so high, because ultimately the 777 purchase of this football club, they look towards buying a Premier League asset, not and does hanging fire too long? Does that risk their investment moving forward? Does that make it? Does that change the valuation of the football club if the risk of relegation is increased? Because ultimately there would have been agreed price for a Premier League football club. So there's a lot of questions around that. It's really difficult actually, because I don't think there's any appetite from either side to see that happen. I think they'll be hoping to God that the club just manages to bump along, pick up the points it needs to just keep itself in the mix, and then make a sensible decision upon either completion of this takeover or whether or not Moshiri remains in situ. But either way, it's several £1 million worth of compensation, which would have to be factored in at a time when they're already going to have to seek huge amounts to complete a purchase of a football club anyway.
Dave, one of the things that we heard on Friday, perhaps more so in background talks, is both Everton and 777 seem confident that they will get the approval that they need from the regulatory bodies. Obviously, the Premier League being one, Financial Conduct Authority being the other. Now, they would say that. Of course they would. I mean, from someone that's more of an expert in this field, and they obviously will have looked at this over the weekend, we've seen a number of headlines over the course of, to be honest, the past week. They predate the announcement suggesting that 777 would have difficulty getting a deal over the line with the regulators when they come under scrutiny. What's your current understanding of the situation? And obviously there's two elements to this, I think, isn't there? So on the one hand, you have the regulatory approval. Can they pass the fit and proper owners test that both the Premier League and the Financial Conduct Authority now undertake? And then separately, obviously, we know that one of the major issues that probably held back any sale or investment in Everton over recent months, or in the 18 months that Moshiri has been looking for, for at the very least support with the financial burden of Everton, is the fact that on top of anything that he might try and hope to salvage from the club, there's all these creditors as well. You have the likes of rights and media funding that objected, it seems, to the MSP deal, and they're owed around £200 million. You now have MSP effectively having £100 million loan with Everton. I mean, there's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross there for 777. How easy is it going to be for them?
I think almost the biggest issues are the ones you touched on towards the back end there. It's the ensuring that the existing creditors are happy with a takeover deal, because obviously the previous one with MSP was ended because of objections to elements of the deal and the valuation of equity and kind of dilution of security against their loan for rights and media funding. But then obviously you've got now MSP in the picture as well. So are they going to object to takeover by the football club of a party who they beat to exclusivity talks a few weeks ago? And then the second biggest issue is proof of funding. Fully leveraged buyouts are now banned by the Premier League. I mean, that won't be, there would be an element of it. I mean, this purchase would be debt and equity. So I believe there are various options available to 777 in terms of securing funding, but I don't think that the some of the issues which were raised around potentially one of the directors, Josh Wander's previous criminal record or criminal convictions, etc., or some of the scrutiny around the multi-club model, I don't think that at the moment would be enough for this deal to be stopped. I think the biggest obstacles to me do appear to be getting the creditors to agree to the deal, and also the proof of funding, because it wouldn't have got to this point, and we've had conversations about this previously, that it wouldn't have got to this point if there wasn't some confidence from 777 and Moshiri's side that they would be able to overcome these obstacles. But this is finance, and curveballs get thrown with regards to this, and obviously we've seen the headlines over the weekend about one of the MSP potentially being objecting to a takeover. Again, the stance being today from 777, as you would expect, as they're confident of being able to tick all the boxes they need to acquire the club. But I do think those two things are the biggest barriers getting this concluded in a positive fashion for Mashiri.
Thanks, Dave. Gav, I'm not sure if you saw this over the weekend, but we saw Hertha Berlin fans now protesting against 777. They're another club that's within its stable. So, I mean, you know, albeit only a cursory glance, it's very easy to find 3 out of 7 sets of fan bases that are quite open in their disapproval of 777's involvement in the club. I mean, you know, 3 days on from when we last spoke about this on Friday, have you seen, read, heard anything to allay your, you know, any concerns you may have about this move?
In a word, no. And I could also say that the more you delve into things, the more you find reasons to think that they're not suitable owners. But this goes back to what I said on Friday, isn't it? If you've got no options or few options, then you end up getting something that is, you know, not an ideal solution. This is a bit of an understatement. That's where Mashiri is here, isn't he, really? Where he's fishing at the moment is, you know, and he's not fishing in the blue chip pond, is he? He's fishing elsewhere. And I think that's reflected in, you know, who's, I'd say, 777 and their reputation. And that is a concern, isn't it, really? But I don't know what you think about this. Is where does the stadium sit in all of this in terms of when it's completed? Is it in their best interest to if Tube 777 come in, is it in their best interest to retain a stadium, or would that be an asset they'd want to look to offload and get a bit of money for?
I imagine the stadium, like anywhere, is the one of the biggest assets that investors want. They want, ultimately, a lot of the time, they want land. I mean, it's not for redevelopment or anything now. It's for the potential. If they acquired Everton, core to Everton being successful in the future is maximising the benefit of having a new stadium, and that'll be commercial revenues. And also, we had that talk in the past about ancillary development around Liverpool potentially being included in that work. But yeah, in order for Everton to be commercially successful, not only is it predicated on being the Premier League, it's also the ability for the owners to have kind of say over how they operate in the stadium moving forward. I don't think they want to be in kind of deference to any other owners. I mean, we see this issue in Paris, of Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, they rent the city off the Council of Paris, and the main issue for them at the moment is they want to expand, they want to do things to it, or they want to have certain events held on it to try and raise money. Ultimately, it's kind of they pay rent for it, and they don't get to see the benefit of having an asset in the city. So I imagine this is, it is core part of them wanting to acquire the club is having the kind of the stadium as the centrepiece, really.
Does that full process, Dave, revolve around the hope and belief that they would have a long-term strategy in which 777 and Everton's benefits align, to use a Sean Dyche word, as opposed to, if 777 would perhaps put their interests first and operate from that perspective? Would there be any potential for them to look at selling the stadium in that respect to perhaps get a cash windfall?
I don't think so. No, I think. My view on 777 is, I don't know. They are a company which kind of emerged. On the football scene in 2018, 2019, COVID's been a great driver of in terms of acquiring football clubs, because it presented an opportunity where football clubs needed capital, more willing to take it on because of the impacts of the pandemic. So they've acquired football clubs on the cheap. Now, in reality, it's hard to know. I know we look at what happens at Hertha, Red Star, Vasco da Gama. It's all still quite in the infancy stage, almost, a lot of those acquisitions. They would point to Genoa being somewhere where they've been a bit longer, where they've started to try and affect some kind of positive change. And it hasn't been, earth-shattering, but they've made some progression, and there isn't kind of the hostility you would expect there. So it's hard to kind of know. You talk about a long-term play. It's hard to to see any kind of evidence of anything really, because it's a firm which is, both my kids are older than it, so it's like it's hard to know so much about what it will look like after a certain point, because at the moment everything is new. So their acquisitions of the Vasco da Gama one was interesting, because it was an acquisition at a time when Brazilian Super League is going to be is changing the way it's governed and regulated, and it's going to become more like it's going to become a Super League, so it's going to acquire the biggest and most historic teams from Brazil, change the way it's regulated, and the teams get a bigger slice of broadcast revenue, because they look at it and think, well, we're Brazil, we produce the best players in the world, why have we got one of, an unimpressive domestic league? So I understand the investment there. The Hertha one they bought for a song at 15 million. It was a club already in free fall, still falling. So it's how quickly you can turn these things around. But in reality, we don't really know too much about them, do we? Because we had the announcement Friday with this. Obviously, there's been explosive allegations about certain aspects of their previous business dealings. But in terms of knowing too much about them as a business, as people, it's been quite difficult. So hopefully we'll get that chance before any kind of sale, is concluded. It'd be nice to try and ascertain what these, the real story is behind it. But in terms of a long-term plan, it's hard to know what kind of long-term plan is when kind of all their investments are only 2 or 3 years old.
Well, that's it, Dave. I'll finish with you just for one last thing before we wrap it up. Obviously, we know that this is going to take certainly a couple of months. There's a hope that it'll get done before the end of the year, if it does get done at all. That's from an Everton and a 777 perspective, of course. What that means for things like January is something I think we'll discuss in future podcasts. Obviously, things are looking, it's a difficult start to the season for Everton. I'm starting to look to that towards that December already, and the run of fixtures that Everton have got there, and just trying to think, well, that's going to be a very busy and a very difficult month, December. And bearing in mind that we already know that Everton aren't going to get off to the start that we hoped was a realistic possibility, bearing in mind how kind of fixture list had been. You could see a little bit of clamour going into January, whereby the club may need a bit of strengthening, and who makes those decisions, what money is available, is going to be a big question. But we'll park that issue for the time being. And just what I wanted to finish on is, now that we've had the announcement, and whilst we go through the regulatory process, I know that 777 have said that they're not particularly keen to kind of communicate due to respect for the governance process at the moment. I think that that's the wrong decision. I wrote my Royal Blue on this the other day. I think they can be relatively open without prejudicing anything, any of those formal procedures, and I think that Everton fans deserve, rather than 777 say, give us the benefit of that when there's all this negative stuff out there. I think Everton fans, bearing in mind how important they are to the club, both on and off the pitch, I think they deserve 777 coming out and giving them a little bit of insight into those plans. But again, moving away from that, what should we be looking out for between now and Christmas? Is it just a case of waiting and seeing until the checks all come back and a decision's made either way, or is there anything else that's likely to come out in the public domain in between that time that will give us any insight into what's going on? And obviously, I know that perhaps the biggest thing that you might mention is going to be next month's hearing in relation to the alleged breach of Premier League financial regulations.
Yeah, and that's going to be impactful to what happens to the takeover. How what action, if any, is taken against the football club? Because if it's already struggling this season and there's a points deduction, then that will likely see a return to the drawing board in terms of what happens, because it'll change. It probably changes the value of the football club, because when this deal's been agreed, they've agreed it on the basis that this is a Premier League football club. If there are issues which have happened, kind of under previous ownership or Managerial's ownership, or if it would have been previous ownership, if 777 take control, then that's to the detriment of the new owners and the price. So that's that could well delay this again. Another thing we may well see in the coming over the course of the next month could well be it was mentioned by Bloomberg about 6 weeks ago that there was going to be a capital raise that 777 was seeking via Tifosi, which was going to be about $220 million. Believe that could see the light of day in the next couple of weeks. However, that isn't, I'm told, linked to the funding of the football club takeover. Any of that money, that's for other strategic objectives away from the Everton deal. So they will be searching elsewhere for any additional capital they need to complete the Everton purchase. I mean, they're convinced they have proof of funds on that, etc. But if that, from what I'm told, that Tifosi capital raise, which was mentioned in about 6 weeks ago, won't be impacting Everton's takeover.
Is it? I'm just going to ask. This is a very kind of naive question, so apologies for this. If they were to raise the 200 odd million that they're looking for from that Tifosi, but their strategy would be to use it elsewhere, I mean, is there any chance they could use it to kind of help strengthen their financial case to the Premier League? And then, even though they might have longer, in the longer term, they might have different ambitions for it.
Potentially, I mean, what they have to do as part of this Premier League test is obviously proof of funds, but then a business plan for the next 12 months, right, which will very much have to involve around, they'll have to show they've not only got the funds for the takeover, but also to implement kind of progressive change moving forward over 12 months. So I don't think it'd be something that they'd be able to really use to strong arm the Premier League. I think Josh Wander's recent election to the European Clubs Association wasn't without some element of showing a case maybe for acquisition through, obviously he represents Standard Liège through that nomination, that election to the board, but having had to pass those ECA checks, I think he probably it gives 777 a more visible place on the European football stage. So I think that was quite telling, the timing of that particular seeking for election. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very interesting next 8-12 weeks or so, and what happens on and off the field will be, it means there's a lot at stake, whether it's Everton's fortunes, and if they continue to sink, what happens at the independent commission hearing over the profit and sustainability allegations of breaching those, and also the Premier League's check. So I don't think there's ever been more at stake for Everton Football Club than between now and Christmas, really. And it's a crucial time. And as you said before, Joe, I think it would be nice to be able to quiz, within the realms of what's allowed via NDAs through financial disclosure, etc., about what really is the plan for who could take over, because I think Everton fans really need to know.
Really appreciate that insight, Dave. Thank you. Obviously, like Dave says, there is clearly going to be a very, very important few months coming up for Everton, and hopefully you'll come to us, because we'll have all the latest on it throughout. So we've been the Royal Blue Podcast today. Thank you very much for listening to us. We hope you have a wonderful week. We'll be back with you on Friday ahead of, let's hope it'll be a good trip to London with Brentford coming up on Saturday. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.